Beginning Tuesday, South Korea's Seoul metropolitan area is back under level 2.5 of COVID prevention rules after daily infection cases soared to the 500s and 600s last week in the country. Health authorities have said that daily cases nationwide could reach even 900 this week, a level that was once unimaginable for the country that was praised earlier in the year for its swift handling of the pandemic in the spring. As COVID-19 cases continue to rise relentlessly across the world amid the colder season, experts have warned that we're headed for a tough winter, even with a vaccine on the way. We discussed the situation in South Korea and the efforts being made to fight the coronavirus while preparing for a broad-scale vaccination. For this, we're joined today by David Kwak, a physician at the Soonchunhyang University Hospital in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We also welcome back Ben Cowling, Professor and Head of the Division of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Hong Kong's School of Public Health. It's really nice to see you again.
Good morning.
Well, let's go straight into the discussion, starting with you, Dr. Kwok, with the situation here in South Korea right now. Authorities, they've been warning that, health authorities, they've warned that South Korea might hit 900 cases a day this week, or even top 1,000 if social distancing guidelines aren't followed properly. What's been the reason behind this very sudden spike in the numbers when we seem to have it so under control in the spring to a level that might seem even suspicious to some? I mean, hitting 12 to 15 just before the parliamentary elections. And of course, a few weeks ago, the government was encouraging us to go out, dine, shop and travel, and even offering us massive discounts in restaurants, theatres, hotels. I mean, just what's going on here?
Right. So I first want to blame on our complacency here. Ever since the government has brought down the social distancing level to 1 early on in October, if we look back at the graphs of the daily case numbers, we see the numbers actually are gradually increasing since the early time of October. It just means that when the government has made the decisions to take down the level from the original 2 that we used to have down to 1, and possibly try to attempt to boost the economy for circulating, it started going on, and we started to see a lot of the numbers, not just in an immediate sense, but it started to gradually increase to what we have. So I don't think this particular numbers that we're currently seeing over 600 or 500 is not something that happened out of nowhere, but rather it gradually increased to the point that we have currently. On top of this, we had also the college entrance exam happen last week, from which we could also possibly add some numbers to the numbers that we already have. So that's probably the reason why the government is also being particularly worried that it might hit up to 900 and 1,000 possibly going into next week. Hopeful of the cases that the people who are looking at the numbers as I am would be more scared to actually go out and mingle up and live the social life. So that hopefully might stabilize the number back down to possibly 300s and 400s. And if we add the numbers from the college entrance exam to that, we'll hopefully see something way below the 900 or 1,000 that's to be expected.
So, Dr. Kwok, some people in the country, they're asking, I mean, what is the point of having these restrictions now? Some are saying that, while others, the Korean Medical Association, they're pushing for higher levels of social distancing. They're saying, why aren't we going to level 3? Why are we staying at level 2.5? So what really is the reasoning behind the government's decision to keep the restrictions at level 2.5? And beyond that, is it really effective to have this very cyclical easing and tightening of restrictions?
Well, I'm saying because the government is not medical doctors. They're not medical doctors. They only care for health issues regarding to the citizens. They also have to look after the economic sectors of the society, because without the economy, without the money flowing, people will just go out of business. People could possibly have much dire effects from secondary and tertiary effects from the bad economy. So they have to balance this as well as they can to have both the economy going, but also to mitigate the virus as much as possible. Now, that being said, on and off of the social distancing levels, that's probably the best method they could possibly take at this moment, because they cannot really just hit it up to level 3 and stop the whole society. But also at the same time, they cannot go back down to level 1 to allow more patients and more severe patients to come to possibly have the medical sector completely stopped. At this stage, I think it's currently being manageable. The medical care, we still have some ICU beds left. Even though social facilities are mostly filled up at this point, I think it's still being manageable at this point. So I think government is really balancing on their tiptoes to have both the economy and both the healthcare going.
Right, so, well, East Asian countries, they were being highly praised by the world for really adapting to the situation, the government, I mean, and really adapting the restrictions as well according to the situation and the number of infections. And Dr. Cowling, so East Asian countries, they were praised for flattening the curve during the early months of the pandemic, as well as the public as well. They showed very strong social compliance with the restrictions in daily life that made the numbers very manageable. But do you think at this point the members of these societies are getting rather exhausted of this constant easing and tightening of restrictions?
Yeah, we've certainly seen a lot of fatigue. And I think one important point is that whatever the government does, it also depends on what people do in terms of how the coronavirus is going to be spreading. So you mentioned levels 1, 2, 3 in Korea, 1, 2.5 and so on. Whatever the government's doing, it may have a different effect depending on how people respond to that and how people behave. If people aren't complying with social distancing regulations, then the government may have to go even stricter to kind of force people to do things that they want them to do. But of course, I would say in Korea, in Asia, the numbers of cases are still much, much lower than they have been in Europe and North America and elsewhere in the world. So although we're not doing so well right now, we've still done really well over the last 9 or 10 months in dealing with coronavirus. And I think we'll get over this resurgence as well.
Oh, yeah, and Dr. Cowling, it looks like Western countries like the UK, the US, and countries in Europe, of course, they're working very quickly to distribute the Pfizer and BioNTech's vaccine. But then, on the other hand, you've got countries like South Korea and Australia who aren't in too much of a hurry, and they're rather focusing on keeping the infection numbers down. What do you think about these two different approaches?
I think we are in a hurry everywhere in the world to get the vaccine because that's our pathway to get back to normal. Once we can vaccinate the elderly, the vulnerable people, the healthcare workers, then we can start getting back to normal. And once we've vaccinated everybody, then we can really go back to normal. And the sooner that happens, the better. But we're just not at the front of the queue for vaccines, so we're going to have to wait our turn. And I think the US and some European countries are going to go first.
And well, Dr. Kwok, the South Korean government, they've only very recently announced that they sealed a deal with AstraZeneca on distributing a vaccine here in South Korea. But then on the other hand, we see countries like the UK, US and Japan, they procured millions of doses from major vaccine developers months ago. So some people say that this was rather irresponsible. Was there a particular reason for moving so slowly and without much transparency? Because we don't really know much about what kind of negotiations they've been having and what's really in the deal with AstraZeneca as well.
Well, I can only make speculations on that issue. I could never know what really goes on in the closed doors of the government at this point. I am 100% sure that they're trying their best to decide what is best for our citizens. So whether it be AstraZeneca or for any other vaccine options that they might have at hand, they're going to pick the best one for our citizens. Now, that being said, as some of the other scientists also mentioned before, because of the situation of the pandemic that we have at hand, going forward with vaccinations right away may sound a little bit too risky at this time. I'm not saying the first and second and the third phase of the clinical trials that the company showed us is invalid, but I'm saying that it was still very hasty. Meaning usually a clinical trial phase 3 would take years at a time to make sure of its efficacy and also its safety. We have some proof that they are safe to use and they are effective to use But it doesn't guarantee us, let's say, from long-term side effects. Something could happen possibly 5 years down the road. So, but that doesn't mean that we should do without vaccinations. We are still at a very in an urgent situation. We need to get some sort of treatment regimen, some sort of vaccination, so that this could be over once and for all people all over the world. So I think at this point, for Korea's stance, it is best to get some sort of vaccinations that is effective, both effective and safe for our citizens as soon as possible. But standing first in line to get the vaccinations right away might not be the best choice for their citizens.
And Dr. Kwok, Kim Gang-nib, who is the head of the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety here in South Korea, he suggested that South Korea could start vaccinating people from the second quarter of next year, and that's only if things move along quickly. So if this does happen on schedule, then how long do you think it would take South Korea to hit that 70% immunity threshold that you scientists are talking about?
Well, personally, I think that'll be a long time ahead of us. Because even if we start, say, as Dr. Kim said, if we just immediately start in April, that still means we have to get our second shot a month later, which falls on in May. But it's we're only talking about numbers possibly in the tens of millions of dosages here. So meaning, if we could get 10 million dosage right away vaccinated, all the citizens, that only means a fifth of the people will be getting half the doses at the point. So a month into that, it only means a fifth of the population would have gotten immunized. That still gives us plenty of other portion of the population waiting in line to be vaccinated. So I think to reach that herd immunity point, it's quite a while.
Now, Dr. Cowling, South Korea's SK Bioscience, they signed a deal with AstraZeneca to produce the Oxford vaccine here on the peninsula. So what would you say are the advantages of manufacturing the vaccine in South Korea? And how do you think it could maybe then benefit neighbours in the region, especially those in Southeast Asia, which would find mRNA vaccines like Moderna and Pfizer's quite challenging logistically?
Yeah, it's great news. I think the Oxford University vaccine under AstraZeneca, that they're looking to make that in different parts of the world, maybe in China, in India, as you said, in Korea, in other countries, in different continents, so that every continent can have their own local production capacity and local supply, because the capacity in the UK and North America is not enough for the whole world, at least not quickly. So it's great news for Korea, because that means you'll be at the top of the list to get that vaccine once it's approved. And it does look like a good vaccine. We've seen the follow-up from Moderna and Pfizer vaccines in the first month or two. They have very good efficacy. We don't know about the longer term effect. And it's possible that the Oxford vaccine would be actually quite comparable. I know the numbers didn't look as good to start with, but actually I think it could be quite comparable. And as you mentioned, it's easier to distribute, easier to administer. So I think it's really great news.
Right, and your health minister, the UK's health minister, said that there could be more positive results before Christmas Day from AstraZeneca, so hopefully we will see good developments there. But Dr. Kwok, there are also vaccines being developed locally here in South Korea, and 5 of them, I believe, are under clinical trials. And while they might be a bit behind compared to the global frontrunners, are we seeing steady progress? And also, they're using what they're calling DNA technology-based vaccines. What are these exactly? I mean, how do we set them apart from mRNA and protein or the viral-based candidates that we're used to hearing about?
All right. So these few companies, Korean companies that are trying to come up with their own vaccinations, yes, as you said, they are in progress very slowly, but they do make progress at this moment. I believe a couple of companies are trying to conduct their larger scale clinical trials in other countries, because just at this moment, we cannot recruit enough people to meet the, let's say, 30,000 or 40,000 criteria for clinical trial phase 3. That being said, what sets apart the DNA type of vaccinations from others, such as mRNA or plasmid vector type, is the fact that, well, they all work in the same way, that they try to make antigens within the body which our body could be exposed to, and make ourselves the antibodies against such antigens. Antigens meaning some parts of some morphological parts of the virus that we could attack against. DNA type is another method that exposes the antigen molecule into our body. mRNA type, when there's a cellular mechanism produces proteins through transcribing the DNA material into mRNA and then to proteins. So it's all in a process where these vaccinations are being made. So mRNA types are directly translated into proteins as the DNA. They're also using the cellular mechanism to produce proteins to produce antigens, meaning DNA type is also another type of vaccination that uses a very similar technology. One particular thing that sets it apart, though, is that it's known to cause a very effective immunogenicity, meaning it is very effective in producing antigens that we could build our antibodies against.
So we are seeing progress on these vaccines being developed here and around the world, and the more we have, the better, just to suit every kind of environment and situation globally. And of course, as many experts have said, this is not a race, and we all need to just be encouraging of any kind of development that we see. But this is where we'll have to end the discussion today. But that was Dr. David Kwok at the Soonchunhyang University Hospital in Seoul and Dr. Ben Cowling, Professor and Head of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Hong Kong School of Public Health. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you for watching.